The door shut with finality, leaving Gunnar standing alone, shoulders tense, the weight of what almost happened still lingering in the air. Then, Darren! The door creaked back open. Darren stuck his head back in, hesitant. Yes? Gunnar narrowed his eye. Get everyone in the war room, now. Darren nodded quickly. On it, boss. And then, gone. Gunnar exhaled, rubbing his temple. For a brief moment there was peace. Darren strode down the hall, shaking his head to himself. I just walked into the most awkward moment in history. Cool, totally fine. Not weird at all. Then his eyes landed on the intercom system. And suddenly, he saw an opportunity. A smirk spread across his face as he pressed the button. Intercom system, all channels. Pack, assemble. Silence. Then, from his office, Gunnar let out a long, deep sigh. He shook his head. I should have seen that coming. The war room was already full when Gunnar arrived, and from the tension in the air, he knew that Darren's little pack, assemble stunt had been met with mixed reactions. No one spoke about it outright, but the looks passing between some of them told Gunnar that Darren would probably catch hell for it later. That was fine. There were bigger things to deal with. As Gunnar entered, conversations died down, and all eyes turned to him. He wasn't the type to clear his throat or waste time with unnecessary words. He walked straight to the center of the room, placing his hands on the table, one flesh, one gleaming cybernetic limb still carrying faint scratches from countless battles. His gaze swept over the assembled team, Bianca standing with her arms crossed, jaw clenched, waiting for orders. Eli, her datapad in hand, prepared to go over her findings. Darren leaning against the back wall, looking far too pleased with himself. Rose standing with her crew, Caleb, Evelyn, and Argos, all tense, waiting for answers. Jewel near a chair that hadn't yet been occupied. Then, Shade walked in. A heavy silence fell over the room. Still pale from his injuries, he moved stiffly but with determination, his usual smooth grace hindered by the damage done to his leg. He leaned on the chair next to Jewel, but refused to sit down. Jewel caught Gunnar's gaze and gave him a slight shake of the head. Don't bother telling him to rest. He won't. Gunnar exhaled slowly before speaking. All right, here's what we know. He started with the worst of it. The soldiers we faced in the last battle? They weren't just enhanced, they were permanently modified. Voidstone 2.0 isn't just a drug anymore, it's a transformation. Once they take it, it changes them for good. Stronger, faster, nearly impossible to kill. And we know for a fact there's more where they came from. Bianca's expression hardened. We only saw 10 of them last time. The rest of the Black Dawn forces weren't like that. But if they start mass-producing these things, we're in trouble. Gunnar nodded. Which means we need to hit them before they can build an army. Eli tapped her datapad, bringing up a holo projection of the Black Dawn rifle that Shade had recovered. We're also dealing with something we haven't seen before. Black Dawn's new weapons. This rifle doesn't fire conventional ammunition. It uses magic, channeled through a crystalline core. The energy it fires? It doesn't just wound, it disrupts the nervous system. That's what locked up Shade's leg. Shade gave a slight nod, his expression unreadable. Eli continued. Based on our analysis, the effect lasted for about an hour. Meaning, if they hit you, they don't even have to kill you. They can just shut you down and finish the job later. A grim silence settled over the room. Gunnar's voice was sharp. We're facing an enemy that's finally catching up to us. They're not just using magic anymore. They're evolving. He let that sink in before shifting the conversation. We're not fighting this alone. Aeliana brought 8 elven guards to secure the portal site. A company of 111 soldiers is being prepared, but they won't be here for a few days. Caleb let out a low whistle. That's a lot of elves. Gunnar ignored him. We also have 4 elven artisans arriving to help speed up our enchanted ammunition production. The sooner we get those rounds stockpiled, the better. Eli glanced at him. Do you trust them? Aeliana does. That's enough for now. Gunner's gaze shifted to Rose. There's one more thing. We might have a way to track Draven. Rose's eyes narrowed. Explain. You said you could hack into his network if you had access to a portal. I asked Aeliana to get us one. Rose blinked. For the first time in a while, she actually looked surprised. You asked for something from the council? I demanded, Gunner corrected. Aeliana's working on it. And if she gets it? Then you're going to get us inside Draven's network, and when you do, we'll use it to hit him before he knows what's coming. A slow, dangerous smirk spread across Rose's lips. Now that is something I can work with. The room was silent as they absorbed everything. Then, in true Darren fashion. So, magic super soldiers and laser guns. Cool. Totally fine. Not terrifying at all. Rose shot him a glare. Not the time, Darren. Eli rubbed her temple. If we don't find a way to counter this, we're going to be fighting a losing war. Bianca folded her arms. The one we took down? It took all three of us, Lyra, Katrina, and me. If they roll out a full squad of them, I don't know if we can stop them. Shade, despite his injury, spoke up next. Then we don't let them get that far. We find out where these soldiers are being made. Gunner nodded. That's the next move. Rose, if Aeliana comes through, you're leading the charge on Draven's network. Eli, you and Darren need to break down that rifle and find a way to counter it. Eli nodded. Already working on it. Gunner looked around the table, meeting each of their gazes. The war just changed. If we don't hit first, we won't survive the next round. The room remained tense but determined. There was no more hesitation. This was the moment they moved from defense to attack. The early morning light filtered through the high windows of the mess hall, casting long shadows across the room. The air carried the familiar scent of coffee and breakfast, but there was something else in the air, something heavy, unspoken. The mess hall still bore the scars of the fight between Lyra and Rose. A shattered table near the far wall. A deep scorch mark on the ceiling where Rose's magic had struck home. The faint scent of burned ozone still clung to the edges of the room, despite every attempt to scrub it away. It had only been 3 days ago, but it felt like months. Now the team was here again, waiting. In the farthest corner of the room, Gunner sat alone. His cybernetic hand rested on the table, fingers idly tapping against the worn surface. In front of him, a cup of coffee sat, untouched, long gone cold. Next to it, a plate of food, barely touched. Bianca had set it there, but he hadn't even glanced at it. Because he could feel it. The fight was coming. It was a familiar gut-deep certainty, the kind only a lifetime of war could carve into a man's bones. He'd felt it before every major battle, that subtle shift in the air, the way time seemed to slow, the way his instincts sharpened as though his body already knew what was about to happen. He only hoped the reinforcements arrived in time. Bianca leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching Gunner but saying nothing. She'd done what she could, set food in front of him, but she wouldn't push. Darren sat across from Caleb, poking at his food but not eating much either. He'd already been up early, running final checks on the Wolfmobile's ammo. Argos sat beside Evelyn, the celestial gem pulsing faintly against her skin. She hadn't said a word, but her fingers curled unconsciously around the gem's surface. Eli was reviewing sensor feeds on her datapad, scanning for any early signs of trouble. Rose and Katrina were talking in hushed tones near the entrance, their body language tense. Desiree sipped her coffee quietly, the sniper ever watchful, even now. Jules sat at the end of the table, medical kit beside her, already preparing for what she knew was coming. Even Clara and Omega had sensed it. The dire wolf sat near her feet, unusually still, golden eyes flicking toward the doorway every so often, as if expecting something. Gunner finally exhaled, lifting his cup. He took a sip. It was ice cold, bitter, stale. He set it down again. Then, the doors to the mess hall swung open. Ashley stepped in first, Beta at her side, followed closely by Shade, Ashley's expression was grim. "Gunnar, we need to talk." Ashley had barely spoken the words before Eli's datapad erupted with alerts. The mess hall trembled as the first explosion rocked the facility. The distant thud of impact sent a ripple through the floor, rattling chairs and unsettling cups on the table. Eli's head snapped up, eyes widening as her datapad lit up with frantic warnings. Multiple portal openings. She barely got the words out before the next blast hit. They're inside the perimeter. Gunnar was already on his feet before the echoes of the explosion faded. His chair tipped over behind him, but he didn't spare it a glance. He could feel it. The battle had begun. "Move," he ordered, his voice calm but carrying the weight of command. No one hesitated. Desiree and Shade were the first out the door, sprinting toward the nearest access ladder leading to the rooftop. Their gear was already slung across their backs, weapons locked and ready. The facility was a mile away, concealed by thick trees, but from up high they would have the best vantage point. Ashley snatched up the 240B, slinging the heavy machine gun over her shoulder as she ran after them. Beta stayed close at her side, ears pinned back, his muscles tense beneath his thick fur. "Katrina, Rose," Gunnar continued, "front entrance." "Hold it. They're coming through there first." Neither woman spoke, but the way Katrina's hand closed around the hilt of her katana said enough. Rose rolled her shoulders, heat already radiating from her palms. Omega and Alpha were at their sides, their low growls filling the space between them. "Darren, Caleb, power up the Wolfmobile and hold position. Wait for my call." Darren gave a quick nod, already moving. Caleb was right behind him, reaching for his rifle as they broke into a jog toward the garage. Gunnar turned to Eli, Evelyn, and Argos. "War room. Now." Eli barely hesitated, still scrolling through sensor readings, her mind racing to make sense of the chaos unfolding across the compound. Evelyn was quiet, her expression unreadable, but Argos was tense, one hand gripping the celestial gem tightly against her chest. The facility was under siege. Desiree and Shade reached the rooftop first. Shade threw open the hatch, stepping onto the gravel-coated surface, while Desiree immediately went prone, bringing her sniper rifle to her shoulder. The thick tree line blocked their direct line of sight to the facility, but the sounds of battle carried through the air, the dull pop of automatic gunfire, the unmistakable howls of the pack, the distant echoes of explosions. "We've got movement," Desiree murmured, scanning through her scope. "They came prepared." Shade crouched beside her, pulling out his binoculars. Below them, the forest remained deceptively still, but he knew better. The enemy was already here. Ashley emerged a few seconds later, setting up the 240B on the roof's edge. Beta flanked her, head low, eyes sharp. "Where do you need me?" she asked. "Center Ridge," Desiree replied. "You'll see the first wave soon." Ashley braced herself, gripping the weapon tightly. The fight was about to reach them. Gunnar stood motionless in the war room, his one good eye locked on the large display screen as the battlefield unfolded in real time. Explosions rippled across the facility, thick smoke curling into the sky. The once secure perimeter was breaking apart, fighters pulling back toward the inner bunker, their defensive line collapsing. Evelyn was already at the console, her fingers flying over the interface. "I'm launching the drones now," she said, voice tight with urgency. The system blinked to life, and within seconds multiple drone feeds appeared, sweeping over the facility. Gunnar didn't react. He already knew what he was about to see. Argos, standing beside Evelyn, had her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps, and her hands trembled. She knew why this was happening. "This is because of me," she whispered. "They wouldn't be here if—" "You need to breathe." Gunnar's voice cut through the rising panic, his tone firm but measured. He turned to face her, leveling her with a steady gaze. "Losing it now isn't going to change anything." Her wide eyes snapped to his, her lips parting like she wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Evelyn, still monitoring the drone feeds, shot Gunnar a look before placing a steadying hand on Argos's shoulder. "Listen to him. We need to focus." Argos swallowed hard and nodded, but the tension didn't leave her. On the screen, the situation at the facility was deteriorating fast. The enemy was pressing in, moving like a tide. Fighters inside the perimeter were falling back toward the last holdout, the bunker. Evelyn sucked in a sharp breath. "We need to send everyone there now." Argos, still pale, turned toward Gunnar. "She's right. If we don't send help, they're going to—" "No!" Gunnar's voice was absolute. Evelyn whipped around. "What do you mean, no?" Gunnar didn't look away from the screen. "It's a diversion." Evelyn stared at him. "A diversion? Gunnar, that's an entire facility about to be wiped out." "That's exactly what they want us to think." His tone didn't rise, didn't waver. Calm, calculated, cold. "Look at how they're moving. They're pressing hard, but not strategically. They don't care about the structure. They care about us running straight into it." Evelyn turned back to the screen, watching the chaotic, brutal battle unfold. Her stomach twisted. He was right. "They're drawing us away from the workshop," he continued. "Ravina knows we'd rush in. If we take the bait, we leave Argos and the celestial gem exposed." A long silence filled the war room, save for the distant echoes of explosions over the speakers. Then the doors opened. Clara stepped inside, her expression unreadable, but her eyes flicked straight to Gunnar, as if she already knew what was happening. "What's the situation?" Gunnar didn't hesitate. He turned to Darren standing by the wall, hands resting on his belt as he waited for orders. "You're green lit," Gunnar said. "Get in there." Darren nodded once. No questions, no hesitation. He turned and left the room. Gunnar's gaze shifted back to the screen, watching the feed from the drones as enemy forces swarmed the bunker. "There are no friendlies outside that structure anymore," he said, more to himself than anyone else. His cybernetic fingers curled into a fist. He exhaled slowly, then spoke the words that sealed the moment. "The Alamo is about to fall." The facility had been humming with quiet routine when Elizabeth first felt the shift in the air. She stood in the central command office, overlooking the courtyard below where students moved between training drills and lectures. The facility had always been a place of discipline, of learning, of preparation. And now, it was a target. Her mountain lion, a silent presence at her side, let out a low rumble of unease. She didn't need the warning, she'd already sensed it. Something was coming. Elizabeth had spent decades in the field. She knew when an enemy was stalking, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The way the wind shifted, the way the birds in the tree line went silent. It was all too familiar. She tapped her radio. "Command to all security teams. Tighten perimeter sweeps. Something's not right." A pause, then her second-in-command, Reynolds, came back. "Copy that, Director. You got a reason?" "Call it instinct." That was all she had to say. In the pack, instinct was law. The facility wasn't defenseless. Far from it. 50 students, young, still learning, but trained. If it came to a fight, they wouldn't be useless. 20 staff, all former agents, instructors, and specialists, armed and experienced. 20-man guard force, dedicated security, M4s and sidearms always within reach. Elizabeth herself, a legend within the agency before she took over here. Her mountain lion wasn't just her spirit animal. It was an extension of her, a predator lurking beneath the surface, waiting for an excuse to unleash hell. She wasn't going to let this facility fall without a fight. She turned to the main security feed, eyes scanning the monitors, just as the first alert flashed red. Unauthorized portal signature detected. Multiple energy surges. Her jaw clenched. "All units," she said into her radio, voice dropping into the cold, sharp tone of an agent preparing for war. "We're under attack. Defensive positions. Now." The alarm blared. Then, the first explosion hit. The sun had barely risen over the treetops when the first explosion shook the facility. Inside the staff quarters, Olivia wiped the sweat from her brow, tossing a towel over her shoulder as she stepped out of the training hall. The early morning hand-to-hand combat session with the students had been a brutal one, just the way she liked it. If they weren't gasping for breath, they weren't learning. She barely had time to take a sip of water before the first alarm blared through the halls. Facility under attack. All personnel to defensive positions. Her instincts, honed over decades of covert operations, kicked in immediately. She dropped the water bottle and pivoted back toward the lockers. The students were scattering, running toward their emergency muster points. Some were shouting, some just stood there, frozen. "Move!" Olivia's voice cracked like a whip, and they obeyed without hesitation. She sprinted toward the locker room. She needed weapons, fast. Across the compound, Alex was halfway through a cup of coffee when the blast rocked the floor beneath her feet. The steaming mug slipped from her grasp and shattered as her instincts screamed at her. "Attack!" She was already moving toward the locker room. She darted out into the hallway, nearly colliding with Alethea, who was heading that way as well. "About damn time," Alethea said, rolling her shoulders as if this were just another training session. Alex shot her a look. "Tell me you've got intel on this." Alethea's smirk was sharp. "Let's go make some." Together, they took off toward the locker room. The distant gunfire echoed through the facility, growing heavier by the second. The security forces were holding the line, but it was only a matter of time before they were overwhelmed. Elizabeth didn't need to see the battle to know how it would go. She had spent too many years fighting, too many years leading teams into situations exactly like this. The thralls didn't use firearms or magic, just raw brute force. They would come in waves, and when the guards ran out of ammunition, the line would break. She and the others needed to be ready. Elizabeth strode into the locker room, her heels clicking against the tile floor with controlled precision. The room smelled of old metal and cleaning supplies, but underneath there was something else. Dust, history, the weight of the past. She wasn't alone. Olivia, Alex, and Alethea were already there, standing in front of lockers they hadn't opened in years. Olivia was the first to move, fingers hovering over the dented metal door before she swung it open. Inside, her old gear sat untouched, a perfectly maintained MP5, a pair of throwing knives, and the black combat gloves she had worn on every covert mission. She ran her fingers over the fabric, remembering the weight of it. "Well," she muttered, reaching for the MP5. "Guess retirement was overrated." Alex smirked as she pulled open her own locker. Yeah, no kidding. Inside hers was a Kevlar vest lined with hidden pockets, a pair of custom-built M9 pistols, and a toolkit that looked like it could open just about anything. She grabbed one of the pistols, rolling her shoulders as she adjusted the familiar weight of the weapon in her grip. Alethea stood in front of hers, tilting her head slightly before she opened it. Her combat uniform was still neatly folded, untouched. Next to it was a short, double-edged combat knife, her favourite weapon for close-quarters fights. She exhaled sharply, grabbing the knife and strapping it to her thigh. Finally, Elizabeth reached her own locker. The others fell silent as she slipped off her jacket, then unbuttoned her white blouse. Elizabeth wasn't a woman who rushed things. Even now, with the battle raging outside, she took her time, because this wasn't just about changing clothes. This was a transformation. She pulled off her skirt, kicking her heels to the side. Then she reached inside the locker and pulled out her old uniform, black tactical pants, a fitted combat shirt, sturdy boots. But the real prize sat on the upper shelf, her gauntlets. The sleek black metal forearm guards looked unassuming at first glance, but as Elizabeth slid them on, the hidden daggers extended with a sharp, mechanical click. She flexed her fingers, watching as the thin, deadly blades retracted just as quickly. Alethea raised an eyebrow. "Still carrying those things?" Elizabeth smirked, tightening the straps around her wrists. "What's a lioness without her claws?" The four women turned to each other, their old gear now secured, their weapons loaded. The past hadn't slowed them down. If anything, it had sharpened them. Elizabeth rolled her shoulders and cracked her neck. No more waiting. Let's move. They strode out of the locker room, heading straight into battle. The facility trembled with the force of distant explosions as Elizabeth and the others strode out of the locker room, geared up, armed, and ready for war. The hallway was filled with controlled chaos, guards moving to their positions, instructors arming themselves, students being ushered into lockdown areas. The air buzzed with tension, with the unspoken understanding that this battle wasn't going to be like the others. Then Michael rolled into view. The wheelchair-bound instructor moved with a smooth efficiency, his hands light on the wheels, his weapon resting across his lap. An M14 rifle, classic but well-maintained, was strapped with a 203 grenade launcher underneath it. The sight of it stopped Elizabeth in her tracks. She raised an eyebrow. "Where the hell did you get that?" Michael gave a cocky grin, tapping the stock of the rifle. "I know a guy." Olivia let out a short laugh while Alex shook her head. "Of course you do," Alethea muttered. Michael gave them a wink. "Keep up, ladies." Then, without waiting for a response, he rolled forward toward the front of the facility, leading the charge. The four women exchanged a look. Elizabeth smirked. "Well, you heard him." And together, the five of them moved into battle. The air outside the facility was thick with the scent of gunpowder and blood. The security team had set up a defensive perimeter just beyond the main entrance, using overturned barricades, sandbags, and vehicles as cover. The gunfire was relentless, the sound echoing off the walls as they poured round after round into the oncoming wave of thralls. At first, they had held strong. The thralls came fast, lunging forward with unnatural speed, their pale eyes vacant, their bodies moving like puppets strung together by some unseen force. But there were too many. Sergeant Reynolds slammed a fresh magazine into his M4, sighted a target, and squeezed the trigger. A burst of gunfire ripped through 3 thralls at once, sending them to the ground in jerking spasms. They didn't stop. They never stopped. "Fall back!" one of the guards shouted from the left flank. "We're getting overrun!" "No!" Reynolds barked. "Hold the damn line! A screeching thrall slammed into the barricade, reaching for him with clawed fingers. Reynolds barely had time to react before he fired point-blank into its skull. The creature went limp, but 2 more were already crawling over its corpse. A bloodied guard stumbled backward, his leg torn open. Another was dragged to the ground, screaming as the thralls piled onto him. Reynolds gritted his teeth. They were out of time. "Fall back to the entrance!" he roared. The remaining security forces moved as one, covering each other as they retreated. They fired as they ran, their last rounds cutting down another dozen thralls before reaching the main doors. The security team was in full retreat, falling back toward the main building, firing in controlled bursts to slow the incoming wave of thralls. They weren't running, but they were damn close to breaking. Sergeant Reynolds covered the left flank, barking orders between bursts of gunfire. Spent casings littered the ground, bodies of the fallen, human and thrall alike, strewn across the battlefield. Then Michael rolled into position. With a practiced flick, he loaded a fresh 40mm round into the M203 grenade launcher. "Let's see how you like this," he muttered, taking aim. Thwomp! The grenade arced through the air, landing dead center in the oncoming horde. Boom! The explosion ripped through the front line of thralls, sending bodies flying in all directions. The sheer force of the blast momentarily halted their advance, creating an opening for the remaining security forces to pull back. Michael was already reloading, firing again. Another blast, another break in the wave. "Move, move, move!" Reynolds shouted, waving his men toward the entrance. Michael winked at Elizabeth as she fell into formation beside him. "Looks like I still got it." Elizabeth smirked. "You're lucky I don't make you run laps for showing off." Another explosion rocked the field, and that's when Darren's voice crackled over the radio. "Facility, this is Wolfmobile. 60 seconds out. Get to cover, because we're coming in hot." Reynolds grabbed his radio. "Copy that, Wolfmobile. We'll have the welcome mat out." Elizabeth turned to the others. Get everyone inside and brace for impact. This isn't over yet. The security team scrambled for cover. Darren was bringing hell with him. Caleb was already in the Wolfmobile, engine growling, systems hot, turret primed. The second he saw Darren sprinting toward him, he couldn't help himself. A smirk tugged at his lips as he leaned against the turret. Damn, Darren, you take any longer and I was going to start collecting social security for you. Darren didn't break stride as he jumped into the driver's seat, grabbing the wheel. Say that again after I throw your ass out at full speed. Caleb chuckled, bracing himself as the Wolfmobile lurched forward, tires spitting gravel as they shot out of the workshop. Darren keyed up the radio, switching channels to the facility. He had one job: get to them before the line broke. Facility, this is Wolfmobile. 60 seconds out. Get to cover, 'cause we're coming in hot. There was a beat of silence before Elizabeth's voice came through, sharp and unimpressed. Move your ass, Darren. You're already 60 seconds late. Caleb laughed. I like her. Darren just gritted his teeth and pressed harder on the gas. Gunnar stood over the battlefield display, his cybernetic fingers curling into a fist as he listened to the exchange. The fight outside the facility was minutes from a total collapse. The drone feeds showed it all. The thralls swarming like insects, security teams pulling back in tight defensive formations, and the last barricades on the verge of breaking. He tapped into the radio. Lioness, this is Gunnar. Hold on. Bulldog is en route. He's almost there. Elizabeth's voice came back over the comms, calm but strained. Tell Bulldog to hurry. We're about to lose the damn porch. Gunnar's jaw tightened. His blue eye never left the screen. Darren could already see the facility coming into view. The main entrance was barely holding, the security team in full retreat towards the last defensive line. Caleb adjusted the turret, flipping off the safety. Hope you don't mind, but I'm about to ruin their whole day. Darren grinned and slammed the throttle forward. The Wolfmobile hit the battlefield like a wrecking ball. The Wolfmobile tore through the battlefield, its miniguns spitting fire and steel, cutting a blazing path through the oncoming thralls. Caleb held the trigger down hard, his grin widening as the tracers and enchanted rounds carved through the horde like a divine execution. Then the gun went dead. A flashing red warning light blinked on the dashboard. Jammed. What the? Caleb yanked on the controls, frustration lacing his voice. Darren, we got a problem. Darren barely had time to react before the roar of the minigun fell into eerie silence. He cursed. Hold on! He swung the Wolfmobile hard to the left, skidding over bodies as he pulled them away from the thick of the fight. Caleb was already trying to clear the jam, but the mechanism was fused tight. We need a minute. Darren keyed the radio. Miniguns down. We're pulling back to fix it. Hold the damn line. Elizabeth, Olivia, Alex, and Alethea stood together at the front, their firearms still raised, but they all knew the truth. It wouldn't be enough. The last wave of thralls closed in. 50 yards, 40, 30. The gunfire around them began to thin. The security team was running dry. Michael fired another grenade, the explosion sending thralls flying, but more kept coming. 20 yards, 15. Then it happened. A sickening, guttural shriek echoed through the battlefield. The thralls broke into a dead sprint. Elizabeth exhaled slowly. She flexed her wrists, and with a sharp metallic click, the retractable daggers in her gauntlets slid into place. What's a lioness without her claws? She murmured, her voice steady. Olivia dropped her MP5, rolling her shoulders as she took a stance. About time we got personal. Alex tightened her gloves. You guys ready for this? Alethea smirked, drawing her combat knife. Hope they are. The thralls crashed into them, and the real fight began.